Hey, good evening. I'd like to call to order the Board of Adjustment meeting for tonight. It's our regular meeting, August 13th at 5:30 p.m. Could we call the roll?
Tiffany Markowski. Kelly Turner.
Here.
Kelly Rod.
Here.
Pat Vader.
Here.
Thank you very much. So we do have a quorum this evening. This is our regular session, so I would like to, before we start, swear in any of our speakers this evening. So did either one of you sign up to speak? So that's easy. Go right ahead.
I do solemnly swear that the testimony I'll provide today will be truthful and complete, unless you want to specifically read it out.
Do you swear or
Yeah,
affirm that the evidence you shall give to the board in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
I do.
Great. Thank you. I'd like to go ahead, and our first order of business is to approve the minutes from the March 12th regular meeting. Can I get a motion to do that? Thank you. So the motion to approve the minutes from March 12th have been, it's been made and been seconded, made by Pat Bader, and the second was from Kelly Turner. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and start with the rest of our meeting tonight. And I am going to bring to mind BOA case number 26-03 to receive comments and consider action on a request for a special exception use by, tell me if I'm wrong, Amar El Hamad of RPA Plastics for the special exception use of manufacturing, processing, and packaging light as required by Section 4.2 of the Unified Development Code for 404 East Kennedale Parkway, parcel 427-85659 Boaz, CA subdivision of the J.B. Renfro, Block 1, Lot 33R2, City of Kennedale, Tarrant County, Texas. That's a lot. So I would like to call on, I believe staff goes first, right? to present?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are in the dog days of summer, so I certainly appreciate all of you coming out this evening for this case. My name is Ed McCroy. I am the Director of Community Development for the City of Kennedale. And just for a bit of knowledge, today is August the 13th, as indicated. It's International Left-Handers Day, so give some love to the left-handers out there. National Filet Mignon Day, which I plan on taking advantage of right after this meeting, if possible. And then the National Prosecco Day. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's a form of adult beverage that I don't typically imbibe in, but for those of you who do, just a day to celebrate it. All right, getting back to the actual business, we're talking about here case number 26.03. The indicated on the map where the star is shows you where this location is. It is on the southern end, if you will, of the Old Town District within our community. It's currently an empty lot. You will notice on the south side, if you will, of Kennedale Parkway. It is an area that is doing some grading work right now and is next to a building just to the north, which is currently under construction, an office building just to the north. These are some pictures. They're a bit dated from the street view from Google. As you can see, it's an empty lot. It's actually had some grading activity that's been allowed. And this is some of the pictures from the area nearby. You can see it's nearby where the current post office is as well. Once again, this is where the location is on our zoning map. And as you can see, the property is zoned Old Town 4. Okay, so it's a fairly long and narrow parcel, right? This is the future land use plan for the site. And you'll notice that pinkish sort of color actually indicates it's a site that was intended for a transit-oriented development. Now, we don't have a specific zoning district for transit-oriented development, right, anywhere in here. And normally this would not be the kind of use that you would tend to see in such a development. Transit-oriented development is places near a bus stop or a major train station or something of that nature, like Grand Central Station, if you think of it. And normally you would find intense uses there, like offices, retail areas, things of that nature. But I will note that there have been some recent zoning actions from the city council in this area that point to the fact that perhaps this sort of intent for the area may be changing in the mind of the city council in terms of what their long-term plan ultimately is for this area. Given that the current comprehensive plan shows 2 locations in the city for transit-oriented development, this would be the southern place for that. And then there's additional one up to the north near the Oak Crest neighborhood on our comprehensive plan. Realistically, having 2 transit stops within such a short distance in Kennedale is probably unlikely, right? My guess is should a transit or light rail line come to fruition along that railroad track, Kennedale would most likely only have 1 such station. And it seems like the northern station is the more probable of the 2. Okay, I'll just bring that to your attention because these are the facts of the land circumstance. And in evaluating your decision this evening, that's something that you should consider, right? As to whether or not the use is appropriate for the area that's indicated. All right, I did want to mention to you that in your packet I provided to you originally, that was in the original packet, that there was an update that was necessary. The applicant submitted some additional, some modifications from the original plan, which reduced substantially one of the buildings and reduced substantially some of the impervious area in concrete. So I have modified the staff report to that with the document that I provided to you. You will notice that those are done in red line strikeout to identify the changes that are appropriate based on the new plan that's been submitted, showing the building reduction in size. And primarily, that's the second building, the building sort of to the west here, which would be the warehousing type building that's been reduced. This is what was shown in submittal of Plan 1, the first submittal, and this is the current submittal that they have provided. This is actually from a grading plan. And as you can see, they've reduced, if you look at the numbers in there, they've reduced the building, the warehouse building there, by a fairly substantial amount. It's gone from originally being shown as 21,000 square feet now to being only 13,000 square feet. That change is primarily intended or required because in the OT4 district, there is a maximum impervious cover of 75%. And the original submittal, as you can see in the original submittal, virtually a very substantial portion of the property was covered by buildings or concrete. So that plan was not in compliance with that standard of the OT4 district. And one of the things that you are to evaluate is whether or not the site can be in compliance with the city's development standards for where it's located at, right? That was not originally considered on this site many years ago. A little bit of history about the site. It actually did have a special exception approved on it sometime in the past, right? So there was one, the applicants came in and they showed you basically submittal 1. That was approved by the Board of Adjustment on that time. However, we have a provision in our Unified Development Code that requires that improvements be completed within 1 year after the special exception is approved. That standard tends to reduce speculative requests until they are more mature and actually ready to move forward. However, after the special exception was approved, the applicants did not take any further development action on it. And a year later, it expired. And so that's why we're here again, because that, in essence, approval is null and void at this point, and it has to be considered from an original perspective at this particular point in time. And once again, I did want to let you know that when this was originally created, there were the approval that you're making is primarily based on whether or not the use that's being proposed is appropriate for the location that's been selected. It's more of a zoning evaluation. However, sometimes details of site development can come into play with that evaluation. So, for example, if a site is in close proximity to residential neighborhoods and it would have significant negative impacts, whether that be noise or light or vibration or smoke of those things, those are perfectly appropriate things for the board to consider when determining whether a special exception is appropriate in this location, right? And when this came before the board the first time, some of those details about building size and concrete and things of that nature were not brought forward for the board to consider. It wasn't evaluated. An evaluation of the site plan submitted really wasn't performed, right? I look at that a little closer and wanted to make sure you were aware. And I will mention that, once again, with the submittal of plan number 2, in my conversations with the owner, right, they have indicated a willingness to comply with city standards. And that is shown by the fact that they've submitted a plan already. Now, it's not a complete site plan per se, so we could issue a building permit yet. There's still a number of details that would have to be resolved. But in my conversations with the owners and operators of this, that's what they've told me is whatever we need to do to bring it into compliance, we'll do. If there are additional changes that are necessary, we're willing to do that. So they're not here to speak for that tonight, but I did want to make sure you are aware that I had that conversation with them. That's a bit of hearsay testimony, but I did want to make sure you're aware that was what I had received from them in determining their intent here. So staff does find it's interesting that this is an Old Town district, and the first 300 feet of this property is within the commercial overlay district for Business 287. So we have some overlapping regulations here that will come into play ultimately when we evaluate the property for complete site plan approval. It's a little complicated because they overlap a little bit and they're not always complementary in certain cases, but we're working through that. And based on the submittal that the applicant has made thus far, I am not of the opinion that it would be impossible for them to come into compliance. In fact, I'm very encouraged that they could come into compliance. So the real question here is whether or not you believe that this is an appropriate use for this particular area in an Old Town district, given the circumstances of this site and its surrounding area. You will notice that in the materials that I provided to you earlier, this is an area that does have a significant number of commercial properties, right? It's on an arterial thoroughfare that's 2 lanes wide with a center turn lane, right? I would suspect at some point that this road might even be widened, or there might be a median put in it at some point, given how traffic patterns are increasing and the area is growing between Mansfield and Fort Worth, et cetera. That could happen down the road. So it appears that given this is a site that would be manufacturing in nature, and of course they will have vehicles coming in and going out and making deliveries, and employees, of course, will be coming to the site. Being placed on an arterial roadway like this is not an inappropriate location for a use that would have these kinds of traffic impacts. So staff is recommending that, to the extent that the board is comfortable, that you go ahead and you can approve. We have no objections. I have no objections to the approval of the special exception. I do need to make you aware that it is my evaluation that it doesn't comply with the future land use plan. And I've laid that out for you in both the memo and in my presentation this evening, why I believe it doesn't comply with that future land use plan. But there are some mitigating factors here that you should probably consider, or you might want to consider. Also, this does comply with UDC sections 25(3)A, items 1 through 5. Those are the standards of criteria that you are to use in evaluating this. So there's 6 questions you have to ask. 1 through 5, what the materials they provided to me, I've determined it does comply with those. You can answer yes to all of those. It does not comply with number 6 because there are still, it appears, some probable areas of incompatibility, one of those being some landscape areas that need to be dealt with, et cetera. But given the willingness of the applicant to modify things at this point, I can't say that it is impossible for them to come into compliance, and I fully expect that they would once we bring that to their attention. So very quickly, the 6, as we say, these are the 5 items I talked about earlier, the ones that you have to find. And in your vote, you should make that, in your motion, you should make that as a finding. We find that the applicant complies with these items, the 6 items that are identified. This is number 6, right? And I've identified here, both on the top square there, the things that were originally I found wrong with the first submittal, And in the bottom, these are the things that they have corrected, right, with this second submittal already, where it's struck out. You can see, okay, yeah, you're fine with those. There's still some things that need to be dealt with, and I fully expect that they'll be able to do so. So staff is recommending approval subject to certain conditions. Those would be, number one, that within 1 year, the applicant shall submit a revised site plan demonstrating compliance with city standards, subject to review and approval by the Development Services Director, that'd be me, or a designee, if I should get an employee that can do that. Provided the revised site plan complies with all applicable development standards, it does not materially alter the use approved by the board. Remember, your primary determination here is the use, if the use is appropriate, right? So we don't want them to change this thing, and because of the changes of where buildings are or whatever, it completely changes the nature or character of the organization, of the site. That basically says that they have to stay in compliance with that. Secondly, the special exception that if you approve it is only for the land use, right? And is not approving any of the site plan materials or details that are shown. You're not granting any variances in this approval this evening, giving them any special permissions. They should not rely on these materials later saying, well, the board approved them, so that's a variance. No, that's not true. You're dealing with the land use issues here and not those individual site plans. If a variance is needed, for whatever reason, they can't come into compliance, they would need to come back before this board and seek those variances if it's related to the zoning ordinance. So I just wanted to make sure that's clear that we don't get those two things confused. And finally, I am recommending that because there is some residual single-family development in the area, that they provide a solid screening fence on the property between 6 and 8 feet in height along the east property line, primarily where those residential properties are at, and the refuse containers, be not placed in those areas. So I'll mention that to you. Now, what's interesting here is here you can see that they still have those refuse containers on the same side on both of these plans. I've oriented these plans so they face the same direction. So what we'd be looking for is, you see some properties along here that have some, I'll go back to your zoning ordinances to show you. There are some properties here on the back side and the south side that have what appear to be single family homes on them. And so because they have loading docks facing that direction, right? I believe that a screening device between this property and those homes would be appropriate to try and mitigate noise or other issues that might result from early morning deliveries or large trucks firing up their diesel engines or things of that nature. So that's staff's recommendation this evening. You could make your motion, your findings that items 1 through 5 are satisfied, and then make your motion to approve subject to the conditions as identified by staff if you're so inclined to do so. Or your options are to deny if you don't think this is inappropriate, or if you believe you need more information, you can always continue the item to a future date as well. So those are the 3 options that you have available to you. I stand ready to answer any questions should you have them.
Just one question. The applicant does not want to speak to us tonight.
That's my understanding.
Okay. Just want to make sure he has opportunity if he chooses.
Absolutely. I support that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, dear.
Yes, sir.
Anyway, the warehouse is reduced by a third. I mean, that's adequate for this to proceed. Have you?
Well, we will have to confirm the exact, once again, we're not approving the details of it,
Okay.
right? But from what I've been
Your
able,
recommendation.
right, from what I've been able to determine at this point, the impervious cover issue appears to have been satisfied.
Okay.
There's a lot of geometry and measurements that need to be done in that. And so because they gave me the information on the warehouse building, but they did not provide detailed information on the amount of concrete in the area. You've got some curvature and stuff like that. So that's a little more complicated to figure out, right? They will be providing a more detailed site plan in order to get a building permit. And that'll be one of the things I'll insist upon, that they measure that for me and provide me appropriate dimensions.
The other question I have was, this entire site is it going to be concreted in, or the back part of it doesn't include concrete, or just around the building? Do you know what they're planning?
Yes, what you can see is, well, once again, this is an OT4 district. And so they're only allowed to cover 75% with impervious cover. So what you can see is, and I will point this out on the screen, that this is where the building is. If you can see that icon, it's a little hard to see.
And
This
that's
is where
like
the
a
building
road around,
stops.
correct?
There's a little road around it. And back here, this would all be grass, turf.
Okay.
This area is riprap. And basically that's like rocks.
Sure.
And that's primarily for water that flows out. So it would capture any sort of erosion, dirt, things of that nature, that we keep that from getting into the creek that's behind there, the drainage way that's back there. And so that is considered pervious because water can flow through it.
Yeah.
But it slows that water down, so it reduces erosion.
Okay.
So that would be an acceptable material.
If you could go back to the map that shows the OT4, right? And that's good enough. You mentioned the rail stop. I don't want to handcuff a future council for what would be the more beneficial rail stop in Kennedale. Understand Oak Crest makes most sense for the rail. It doesn't make the most sense for the city. Stopping a rail and making a parking lot up there in Oak Crest doesn't do anything to generate business down here in this part of Kennedale. That's my one concern, is that we're going to be taking up at least a portion that was, OT4 area that we looked at, a dozen years ago to make a rail stop. The city still owns property at the very back of where the Star is, as well as 2 lots on the far side of that. So bringing that up, has there been any discussions with the city manager or the council about that future rail stop? Because that's why that land was bought back when it was.
I'm not aware of any discussions of that nature that have taken place in any official capacity, right? I can just say that what the land use plan shows 2 locations on it, and the likelihood of that plan actually being enacted as shown on the plan is a matter that can be subject to debate.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's going to take a lot of politics to get that there. There's no doubt about it. It's going to take a lot of politics to get a stop in Kennedale, period.
Right.
Which we need to be real aware of right now and be working on, because that is, I think, coming down the pipe here in another 5 or 6 years. I think.
I can also say, and I think this is relevant to your question, I'm assuming that's a question, is that, my understanding is that the city has acquired and made significant investments in terms of the acquisition of land in the Oak Crest area, right? In, I assume, furtherance of having that happen in the future and improving that area from its current condition. That's happened even since my tenure here. Land has been acquired. And so I think when it comes to evaluating the city's priorities, that might be a factor that you could consider.
So they're putting all their eggs in the basket up in Oak Crest, huh?
There's been a number of land transactions that have occurred either between the city or the Economic Development Corporation acquiring land in that area.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
And then this may take a minute. When we think about this future plan, we already have current activities going on. The current activities in that area are primarily retail or small commercial, correct?
Yeah, this is
Not
an area.
industrial necessarily,
Yeah, this is an area that's characterized primarily by commercial activity.
Mhm.
Small, flat metal buildings. There is some uses out there that are auto related in terms of repair, those kinds of things. Of course, we've got the post office as well, which is a bit of an exception. Not too long ago, our temporary fire station was in this general location, right? Again, a 1-story metal building, which is typically more in line with your traditional historic type land use patterns in this area. And we have some empty land as well. Like I said, this particular parcel is right next to a place where there is an office building that's being built, right? It's currently under construction.
Were any of the neighbors, is there any opposition?
No, I've received no that I'm aware of. Did you, Kamisha? Okay. If you would like to speak, sir, I'll need you to fill out did he turn in? Fabulous. So I'm sorry, I lost track of the, I've not received any comment from the community that I'm aware of, either for or against this particular request.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, I just have two questions just for this. I understand this is for land use, so my questions are really just more for my interest here. Can you give me an example of what light manufacturing might happen in this building?
Okay, that's a very good question. All right, very good. Light manufacturing in the city is a variety of uses. You would oftentimes, any kind of processing can be. What's interesting about the city of Kennedale is that there are a number of uses that would, in most zoning ordinances, be considered heavy manufacturing, but they have been explicitly determined and defined as being light in our ordinances. So light manufacturing would typically involve things like assembly. When you see these kinds of uses in an old town district, in most communities, what you're referring to and what I've seen in my experience is this is intended for things like small cabinet shops, customized design, furniture making, things of that nature. Technically, when you're, doing that, you're actually manufacturing something, craft type manufacturing, possibly even small microbreweries or things of that nature. Here, our definition of light manufacturing is more broader. And what you see here might be looked at as, wow, that's an intense use. That's because the way we have defined light manufacturing here, it allows for substantially greater intensity than one might otherwise expect. Did that answer your question?
It does, but then it brought about a comment because that could matter depending on how heavy the manufacturing is. It could impact if there are neighborhoods in the area, homes in the area. Again, I understand this is a land use discussion here, but my thinking is that could impact neighboring areas depending on how heavy the manufacturing ends up being, actually. So that could end up mattering. But my second question is, I understand that the applicant did not complete the improvements within the 1 year period. I assume because you approved it, you're pretty confident that they will this time complete it in the allowed period?
Well, 1 year is actually for the type of development we're talking here. This is a very substantial building. This is not a single family home. Okay. It's going to be a very complex. It's going to require sprinklers, for example. And so that is actually a pretty tight schedule. They've got to go through a site plan process to get that approved. Then they'll have to get their building plans and their civils submitted. They'll have to get all of their underground water lines and sewer lines in place. And then constructing the building itself requires a number of various inspections. So it will be anyone doing a piece of construction here under these circumstances would be challenged, I think, to get it done within a year. Is it possible? Yes, it is. A lot of that depends on how much of that civil and engineering work has been done to date already, right? If they have to, every time you have to redesign these things, it adds delays to there. As the building official, I have the authority to go ahead and extend building permits if need be, and if it's reasonable, right? If an applicant is making reasonable progress, and I would suspect that most of us wouldn't want someone that's 80% complete and they're 1 day late to have their building permit just shut down, red tagged, and the building sit empty. I wouldn't do that, frankly. But a lot of that's going to depend on the applicant themselves and how much work they've done to date. We don't have that building permit yet in place, but in fact, the applicant said to me in one of my phone conversations, they wanted to submit civil plans, which would be for their water and sewer, et cetera, which would be kind of the first step. I suggested they might want to hold off on that based on this approval. Every time you pick up the phone and call an engineer, ka-ching, ka-ching, right? It's going to cost you some money. So in the interest of sort of citizen assistance or being friendly to businesses, It's their decision. They can spend their money however they want to, but should this not be approved this evening, then I would have hated to encourage them to have that cost and it not be fruitful.
Thank you. So depending on how much they get done in that year's period is they'd be granted extensions.
We would take that into consideration as they approach that deadline. And should that happen, we can always bring that back to the board to extend that deadline if need be as well.
Thank you.
One other question I had regarding the use of plastic and molding. Have we addressed the odor and the fumes? Sometimes that process, heated plastic and what have you, gives off a lot of fumes. Is there any provision? That would be in the building permit, I'm sure, as far as abating any kind of noxious fumes from the building, correct?
Yes, the building, we currently use the 2018 International Building Code. And in that building code, there are provisions that relate to mechanical systems, filtration devices, things of that nature. We also have in our Unified Development Code standards that relate to nuisance type issues. So should equipment that they install not function properly, whatever, and there be issues that would fall into that public nuisance realm, those would be enforceable, certainly.
And that's a decision and an issue to be looked at the next step. We're still doing land use and then, because I was thinking about, she brought this up, it's a good point, the sound. You're having somewhat of a warehouse right next door to some residential, the sound and the sight and the smell. All those issues will be dealt P and Z wise, I guess, in the next step.
Well, not necessarily P and Z. The use of light manufacturing is allowed if this board grants a special
Approve it.
exception. And in doing so, you can add conditions if you believe that the use that's requested will have negative impacts on this site or on adjacent communities. You can certainly add those reasonable conditions to your special exception. One of those, as I mentioned, I put in place, which I thought was reasonable, was having a screening wall between this and those residential properties. I will mention those residential properties appear to be what I would refer to as legacy land uses. You know, they were probably houses that were established a number of years ago. Maybe even the land in front of them was empty. They might have been farmhouses or whatever. And then later someone sold off that land on the front to a business person. It seems to me that in this particular area in town, the pattern of development would indicate that at some point in time, the land will be so valuable that single-family residential uses in that area will simply be gentrified, if you will, because the land will be too valuable for them to continue that use and they'll sell to someone else.
It appears the applicant would like to speak, so can you be sworn in and then take the podium for us? That would be great. And after you're sworn in, we do need your name correctly and your address, please. Okay, that's a good point. Are you the applicant or are you the applicant? Okay, so, and did you want to speak as well? Okay, well, why don't you go ahead and get sworn in at this time so she can do it one time. Thank you.
If you'll raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the evidence you shall give to the board in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
I do.
Emmanuel Innocent,
Yes, ma'am.
you're wanting to speak. You're a resident, correct?
Yes, I'm a resident.
Please state your name and address.
My name is Emmanuel Innocent Murokozi. I reside at 1213 Corette Sabreto Road, and I'm currently serving in the United States Army. Yep. Okay. I currently saw what they are they have shown today where they're planning to build this plastic farm, and I happen to walk by there every day when I'm doing my exercises every morning and every evening. And in the first place, I highly state that this is not the right place for this plastic and manufacturing place. Like that's what I would like to state. Kennedale State, since I've been here since 2022, is a forward-looking state. Giving an example of the fireplace we've built, it's a modern place, and as a Kennedale State, we should be looking at building modern facilities that move the city forward, not looking at building this processing plant just to accommodate smaller businesses that have a smaller impact in the community. And this gentleman stated Kennedy is looking at benefiting from the new train station they are planning on building. And I believe as a council, you should look at that and see if we approve this, what will be the impact. If we want Kennedy to be a modern state, it's a smaller state, and we should be doing something that's looks good for the community, looks good for the neighbors, looks good for the community, not approving these small processing manufacturing plants that have no impact on the community. They bring no jobs. If they do, it's 1 or 2 jobs for the family. I believe this is not the appropriate thing. And the fact that the owner or the representative of this company is a no-show. He has no regard for the council to come to speak to the council why they are considering this, state to the council, we are doing this, so you should approve us for this, is a disregard. I think the council should push it back. Let the owner come speak to the council, to these board members, and tell them, hey, I want this approved for this purpose. So the council have the idea. And the fact also, they never talk to the neighbors around, hey, we are going to do this, and the neighbors are okay with it, is a strong case why this council shouldn't say we are approving this to go forward. I believe this council today shouldn't approve this. Number one, like to restate it again, they never talk to the neighbors, no consent from the neighbors, no approval from that perspective. Another perspective is how Kennedy is going to look forward a few years from now. I'm in the military, I look at staying in the Kennedy for the future time. I also look at giving back to this community. So stating all those factors and the environmental factors associated with this thing, I believe highly for this time, this council should send it back and request the owner of the company to come to speak to this, see why are they doing this, and get more information on why this should be done or why this should be built. But for now, I don't think it's the right time to approve this. This shouldn't go forward now. Thank you.
Um, I would say I'm ambivalent. I just want to make some general comments regarding that. Yeah, my name is Christian Riddle, and I live at 432 East Kennedale Parkway. I am directly adjacent to it, and I do want to comment that I like the idea of the screening funds. I appreciate that, but I do have some concerns as a homeowner. I do know that my property and my neighbor's property, our sewage line runs directly through the property. And so I have concerns about how construction will affect our sewage line from a maintenance perspective. Like, you know, if they cause some damage during the construction, will we have to repair that, or basically how that looks. And then I also have concerns that were already brought up regarding the manufacturing process in regards to plastic. I have direct experience working with plastics, and I know pollution is an issue. And so that would be my other comment, is I have concerns regarding the production of plastics, and if they're actually producing plastics, how they plan to mitigate the fumes that are associated with plastic manufacturing. And then my third point or comment I would say would be, I don't really have concerns with noise pollution, but I do have concerns with light pollution. What I really like about where my house is that I have very minimal light pollution. I can go out and look at the stars at night. And that's really something that I am concerned about with a large manufacturing facility because they tend to have lots of lighting. So those are my comments. I would say at this point and at this hearing, I wouldn't necessarily object, but I would like to see how they plan for stuff. Basically, my comments.
I have a question for you. Has the owner approached you or any of your neighbors to explain what they intend to do?
No, they haven't. And I've actually been trying to find the owner so that I can address my concerns specifically about the sewage line and have been unsuccessful. So that's actually why I'm here. I got a letter in the mail about it and was hoping that I could talk with them.
Thank you.
Could I ask a staff question? Okay, so if we're talking about land use, things like the lighting, smell, all those things that if they're not within the use that could be granted tonight, then they would have to follow those. If that is not the case, they'd have to come back to the board for another special exception. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not entirely certain I understand the full context of the question. But what I would say is that the building will need to comply with city standards, and the city does have standards in relationship to light intensity. In fact, that was a matter on another case that I brought to a new development's attention with relationship to light outside. They submitted, a light survey showing the various intensities on the ground where the lights were established, and they did have a couple of places where it exceeded standards, and so they moved some poles around and did some things to make sure they come into standards. Of course, there's always debates about whether those standards are adequate or not. And light pollution is an increasingly interesting concern. It's an increasingly growing concern of a lot of folks, especially, folks that are very oriented towards rural interests, things of that nature. Some cities have adopted something called the dark sky principles. I don't know if you're familiar with those. There's a lot of communities, mostly out west. Here we're in a sort of metropolitan area. So light pollution, whether we do anything about it or not, is likely to continue to increase as the DFW area develops. You're going to have more lights, et cetera, that are going to tend to do those things. But that being said, I hope that answers your question. And I'll mention, if you're still interested, Ms. Markowski, I did find the specific definition for light industrial that I can read into the record if you would like that to be done.
Please.
Okay. So called manufacturing, processing, and packaging light. I'll read that. It comes from section 33.4 of our UDC, which is a definition section. And this is subcategory C1. It's a facility accommodating manufacturing processes involving less intense levels of fabrication and or production, such as the assembly, fabrication, and conversion of already processed raw materials into products, where the operational characteristics of the manufacturing processes and the materials used are unlikely to cause significant impacts on surrounding land uses or the community. The premises may include secondary retail or wholesale sales. Examples of light manufacturing uses include artisan craft product manufacturing, clothing and fabric product manufacturing, furniture and fixtures manufacturing, cabinet shop, media production, photo film processing. That's kind of an old terminology, right? A lab, not accessory to a retail business, printing and publishing, food preparation and packaging, brewery. This definition excludes all uses classified as heavy and all uses specifically excluded within that category. And then, as I referred to, there are surprisingly under the heavy manufacturing uses, under that definition. This definition does not include any of the following, and there are a number of those that are identified in there. So these would all be considered, since it's not heavy, these would be considered light. Ammonia manufacturing, bleach manufacturing, chemical storage or manufacturing, chlorine manufacturing, creosote manufacturing, envelope manufacturing, fertilizer manufacturing, fiberglass manufacturing, fireworks manufacturing, garment manufacturing, gypsum manufacturing, incinerators, insecticide processing, laundry plants, marble manufacturing, mattress manufacturing, meat, poultry, and fish processing, paint manufacturing, paper mill, paper products manufacturing, pesticide processing, petroleum refinery or storage, recycling processing plant, rendering plant, rock crushing plant, smelter plant,
And the list goes on.
tire manufacturing and tire capping plant.
And this is all under light.
Yes, under heavy manufacturing, they say these are specifically excluded. Well, we only have two categories, heavy and light.
Heavy and light.
So if they're not heavy,
It's
they must be
light.
light.
Yeah.
And that's frankly very odd that it says it does not include them. Almost every place else I've worked in, some years I've been doing this, those would be specifically called out as heavy industry
Absolutely.
uses. So it's a little bit surprising.
Maybe that's something we can. bring
I
to-
plan to bring that up in the UDC update, but
Please.
that's not, but
Because, so everyone hears this, if it's not excluded as a use, then that owner of that property has every right to utilize their property within the code to its fullest extent. So whatever manufacturing, whether it be the chemicals you talked about or making tires, whatever, if it's not excluded and it's allowed on that, he can build that and there's not much the city can do to say otherwise.
well, this would be the opportunity to do that. If, for example, and typically what we're talking about here with this kind of plastic activity are oftentimes little beads
Mhm.
that are then heated so that they're pliable and then they're pressed into a mold for like cups or containers or, whatever, little parts that they are. This is not taking chemicals, quote unquote, mixing them together and creating a plastic and injecting it. That's typically the process I think I understand that they're using here, where they're taking materials that have already been manufactured and then just modifying them a
Well, it
bit.
sounds a lot
right?
like manufacturing a tire.
Now, that being said, in your motion, if that's a concern of yours, you could certainly indicate that this special exception is only for the manufacturing processes of this specific applicant this evening for plastics molding. You could certainly do that in your motion, which would exclude those others. And if somebody else wanted to come in on this site for those other uses, the special exception would not be covered by that. I think that would address your concern about, a rendering plant showing up in the site after they've decided to go somewhere
Couldn't he
else.
just, ask the applicant to provide, I guess, an example of the type of manufacturing, just to satisfy the residents and to satisfy our curiosity as a part of this? I mean, I'm keen to, it seems approvable, right? But, couldn't he come and just answer our questions?
Well, I think you couldn't have said it better. I
Yeah.
think it's probably approvable as well, but it sure would be nice to have him stand and he was last month. And of course, we weren't able to have the meeting, but I think there may be just a few outstanding questions that would really kind of ease our conscience on this. I don't disagree.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead then and step down like I said.
Can I
Yes,
ask one
yes,
more
sir.
question? Resident asked about when it does get developed, let's assume, how is that process handled when it comes to extending or modifying the sewer, which would affect these individuals? Because if it cuts right through this property, how does the city ensure that his sewer doesn't get cut off during that process?
Well, of course, I am not familiar with the specific elements of that or where sewer lines are or are not. That's typically not a factor that comes into play in these kinds of approvals, typically. But what I would say is the first thing would be I would ask the applicant to review I would think that the adjacent resident should review their documents as to when they acquired their property and their deeds, for example. Hopefully those show that any of those lines, which may be outside of their property, an easement has been acquired for that. And if they do have such a private easement for their sewer line, the applicant would be prevented from entering into that easement in a way that would prevent it from functioning as it was intended. So most likely, now I can't say that that's true, right? But it's often true if you buy a piece of land and the only way to get a sewer or water service is to cross another's property, right? You would be wise to get that in writing and acquire an easement for where that line is to protect your interests.
Would it be safe to say, in your experience doing this for some time, it's not usually allowed for a new development to interfere or interrupt the city services to the residents or businesses around them unduly?
Well, and some of this gets into an area that might relate to potential civil litigation or conflicts between property owners. So the city is not a party to any of those sorts of things. If, for example, one property owner has, in essence, trespassed on another by putting a service line through another person's property for whatever reason, that would be a private matter between those two properties. And the city would have no part potentially in dealing with that.
Okay, thank you.
The gentleman that spoke second, you have city sewer, correct? You don't have a septic tank or anything like that. So you have city sewer, probably, and you have access to 287 or is it a secondary street?
And sir, if you come with the microphone, your comments won't be captured from back.
The reason I ask that is typically sewer lines go out to the common street. And then that would be the same case with this building going out towards 287 to connect with the sewer line. I don't, not knowing exactly where your property is, can't really see that
Well,
would be an
could
interference.
you go back to the slide that shows the,
But we have pictures too in our book.
Remove that for you. There we go.
yeah,
And if you want to use the mouse for the cursor,
Yeah.
you can see it's kind of a small dot, but you can identify anything.
yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, so my property is right here, my neighbor's property is right here. The sewer line that I'm talking about runs directly across here. And then there's like a city tie right here that goes to the street to 287.
So it goes right across the
It
It
property.
goes right across the property.
That's strange.
It's very strange. I've actually had to do a ton of research because I've tried to find like when this line was run and
Okay.
other stuff, and I can't find anything because
Okay.
my house specifically was built, I believe, in 1947.
Yeah, it's probably
So
yeah, part of a
yeah,
farm.
it predates a lot of.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I do recall, it's been a little while since I looked at this. But one of the things you'll recall on a site plan that's unique is you will see originally there's these two buildings. Why aren't they one building instead of two? Right? And because there is an easement, but you see these dashed lines here? You can see that they understand that there is an easement there and they have protected that easement by placing their businesses outside of it, so it's not on top of it.
I appreciate there's an easement there. That doesn't mean that's where that line is.
That very well could be true too. Installation and locations where easements are on a map are not always the same things.
We still have it would still be reasonable for us to take. It would still be reasonable for us to table this until next month so we can meet with the owner on this and get some of these questions answered.
That's the commission's discretion. Yes, if you don't feel you have enough information to make a decision, you
Yep.
The,
I don't want to have to make a.
no.
Could I,
Just the.
would you be okay with
whole
that?
easement.
No.
Would you be okay if we post?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Mhm.
Well, how about with the chair's approval, that we make a motion to table this until we get some of these questions answered until next month's BOA meeting?
what I would suggest on that, your specific language be to continue, maybe to the
continue-
next rate, rather than table, continue. There's
motion
there's
to
parliamentary
continue.
procedure issues when you use the word table.
Okay, let's do that. Let's just.
That way
make a
it
motion
speeds
to
the process
continue.
up and doesn't cause an unnecessary delay.
I'll second that motion.
Did you catch that?
And can we open for some quick discussion?
Yeah,
I've
that's
got a
fine.
question. Would we be willing to see the applicant sooner than the next, that appropriate? So that we don't make him wait another 30 days.
members of the board, if you meet, you have to be very careful about issues with open meetings acts.
Mhm.
So you're not allowed to deliberate.
No, but could you
matters.
set the meeting sooner than,
Yes, that would be at your discretion too. You can certainly set a special meeting outside of your normal range, and we wouldn't have to, if you set a specific time and date this evening and location, we wouldn't have to re-advertise it. So that's just finding an appropriate date when everybody could meet and there's no conflicting date. I can tell you that I know next month, the 3rd, we have a special called meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission, which is that Monday, right? I also know that on the 10th, there is a meeting, there may be a meeting scheduling conflict then. And then we have City Council and Planning and Zoning Commission meetings that meet on the 3rd and 4th Thursdays of the month. I'm not familiar with other meeting committees, et cetera, Parks Board or whatever, their meeting schedule. So we need to look into that. If you wanted to set that day, we need probably a little bit of a recess to make sure we don't have a conflicting meeting.
correct? I'm gonna ask another procedural question. Is the council in a place to add new people to this board right now? Are they in that space? Isn't this the timing of the year where they would?
It's
make
my
those
understanding that
appointments?
this is traditionally the time when they would make such
Right.
appointments.
So that could be happening right now too.
It may very well be.
Okay. Yeah, I think timing actually might push this to September, and I know I'm absent in September, and I want to avoid not having a quorum. So, but we still don't have answers. So the best we can do tonight is, it sounds like we have a motion and a second to continue this at our next meeting. So I'm going to ask for all those in favor to signify with an aye.
Aye.
Aye. Is anyone opposed?
No.
No. Okay. Absolutely.
That's what I was gonna suggest, I was gonna actually suggest for our next meeting, what are the protocols for the owner, maybe, or not the owner, but maybe your staff? What typically happens with communicating to residents in the area of what's going on, and, inviting them to the next meeting if they want feedback, or or if they want to provide feedback, what are the protocols for that?
We require, in terms of our notification process, we send a newspaper notification prior to the meeting. I believe it's at least 11 days before. And that's published in the Fort Worth Star Telegram, right? Typically on either a Monday or Wednesday or a Friday, right? We also send letters to property owners within 200 feet of the boundary of the request. And so not the residents necessarily. So if you're renting a property, you're not going to get one of those letters, but if you own the property, you'll get one. And on that form, they are given an opportunity to provide comments, and they're invited to attend the meetings if they choose to do so. So in addition to that, signs are placed on the property at the closest street area. In this particular case, I know I personally placed the sign for this, so that people driving by, if they ignore their mail or whatever, they can see that. Now, the longer these things go on, sometimes signs, the wind blows or vehicle knocks them down or whatever. So they do sometimes go off and disappear for whatever reasons. But once we place that initial sign, we've met the statutory requirement for notification.
I second. Our motion to adjourn in a second. Tiffany Marcosi.